This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Goodbye, Superman. Hello, power.
I'm gonna flatten this whole city.
They have to be stopped.
It ends today without a single loss of life.
It's a bit late for that.
Superman versus the Elite.
Welcome, everyone, to the DCAU Review, episode 258. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. Cal, it's the fifth Saturday of the month of April, at least when we originally recorded this and dropped it in April of 2023. And the fifth Saturday months always get a little trip around the multiverse, and we have a pretty exciting one, not only an Elseworlds review, but one that helps celebrate the 85th anniversary of Big Blue himself.
That is correct. Yeah, we wanted to celebrate along with the rest of the world. We just passed that big celebration. It was a wonderful day. You know, there's not too many bright sunny days on Twitter that you can just sit back and enjoy, but that was really fun because you had all these different creators and artists and people that have written for Superman and different various types of media, all celebrating the Man of Steel, the Boy Scout, the Man of Tomorrow, whichever you want to call him. It was a big old love fest for the original superhero, celebrating those 85 years since his original debut in Action Comics #1. But yes, today our trip to the multiverse takes us to the DC animated movie universe, but not the one that is like the main focal point of a whole bunch of movies that we have dubbed the Tuckerverse. Is just one of those direct-to-video feature films that DC Animation has done since I guess the early or the late aughts. I guess they started doing these. So this one in particular is what we're covering today, is also based on the 775th issue of Superman Action Comics, as we'll talk about in just a moment here. But yeah, we are covering Superman versus the Elite, which shares a couple of pieces of DNA with the DCAU, as we'll talk about as we go through here. But yeah, it is an interesting topic. I'd say it's still relevant. A lot of relevant topics to discuss, despite the issue being released a couple decades ago.
Yeah, we'll certainly get into that as we talk about plot in a moment here. A lot of themes, I think, similar, not coming at it from the same slant, but similar to what we've talked recently on our show about in some of the JLU episodes we've covered recently about, you know, the role of a character like Superman in a more sort of modern, quote unquote, realistic world and that sort of thing. So we'll certainly get into that. And before we do, Cal, of course, as always, I must hit our listeners with the one and only official IMDb synopsis for this week's movie, Superman versus the Elite.
That is right, Liam. And of course, this movie was originally released direct to video here in the United States, at least, on June the 12th, 2012, meaning we are coming up on the 11-year anniversary of this episode's release, or this movie's release, rather. And of course, our official IMDb synopsis is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower, and you can check out our entire catalog of Elseworlds episodes, including episodes of different cartoon series and other animated films. We've covered Batman, Under the Red Hood. We've covered things like Batman, The Brave and the Bold, and some of those DC animated movies that we've talked about and mentioned earlier, and some Young Justice. We've covered a whole smorgasbord of DC animation in those Elseworlds months. So if you're interested in checking out some of those episodes, you can watch them or hear them over at youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Not only do you get great content from us, but some fantastic content from our friends at Watchtower Database and Tim Talk as well, but only at youtube.com/The Pod Tower.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for Superman versus the Elite, which was written by Joe Kelly and directed by Michael Chang, with music by Robert J. Krull and animation by Telecom Animation Film Company, based on Action Comics number 775 by Joe Kelly and with art by Doug Mahnke and Lee Bermejo. And that synopsis reads as such. The Man of Steel finds himself outshone by a new team of ruthless superheroes who hold his idealism in contempt.
Okay.
I think that's a bare bones, but it's a good elevator pitch for this movie, I think.
Absolutely it is. And I think before we get into our synopsis, as we tend to on these more long form feature-length films, we're not going to hit every beat by beat as we tend to do with the episodes, because that would likely end in a episode that went over 2 hours or more. So we are just going to sort of bird's eye view a lot of the plot here for the episode. But maybe before we do that, we just briefly touch on the fact that this was, as we've already mentioned, and you mentioned in the synopsis, an issue of Action Comics that came out in 2001, written by Joe Kelly, as you mentioned. And so this certainly is interesting that they decided to take a single issue of a comic that did not, it's like it's a one and done self-contained issue, and they said, you know what, we're going to turn this story into an hour and 20-minute feature-length film. They definitely had to pad the runtime a little bit, I'd say.
Yeah, and we've never reviewed the somewhat infamous Killing Joke adaptation, but I know that's a similar critique a lot of folks had for that one, was that there just wasn't enough to adapt into a movie with that when it came to that source material. And we can certainly get into that. As you said, Cal, we're not going to go beat by beat. So if you haven't watched this movie recently, might be worth, if you have the time to check it out. Like we said, we'll be hitting on kind of the major beats and then sort of discussing the overall themes more than a blow by blow recap. But yes, we sort of open up with an idealized metropolis. Superman and Lois Lane are kind of discussing his role in the world, and if Superman's starting to, maybe even before the elite show up, he's already maybe feeling like he's a little bit cheesy, a little bit outdated. His moral sense, his thought process of stop the bad guys and turn them over to the authorities. And are we kind of already seeing the cracks in that, and a little bit of doubts creeping into his mind.
Well, it doesn't help that Lois is kind of ribbing him because of this whole bit that they start things off, which is like a Superman cartoon within the cartoon world. So they're watching a television, and Superman apparently has signed on for to use his likeness for this Superman cartoon, and he finishes up like the Superman character in the cartoon within the cartoon movie says, perhaps this time they'll learn that crime doesn't pay. And then they cut to the real Lois and Clark watching this in a shop window, and Lois is just really giving him the business, asking him if has he even ever said that line before. But it's Superman swears it's for a good cause, right?
Maybe this time they'll learn that crime doesn't pay.
It never occurred to me that the S stood for silly.
It wasn't that bad.
When have you ever said crime doesn't pay? Well, you can take the kid out of the cornfield.
The producer said it would be inspirational.
And who's profiting from all this so-called inspiration?
Proceeds from the cartoon go to charity, Lois.
And do you get creative input?
Did I mention it all goes to charity?
Point is, you have to protect your S. The world is always watching Superman.
Well, not always.
Ooh, smooth one, farm boy.
Absolutely. The proceeds of the cartoon are going to charity, so he's decided it's worth the trade-off there. But yes, before we can get too much deeper into that sort of philosophical discussion, the atomic skull, there's kind of a deep cut villain for you to show up. And is wasting no time. We see this is a PG-13 movie, so there's plenty of on-screen deaths and collateral damage in this one. And we see him taking his frustrations out, this atomic skull, on several civilians before Superman can finally intervene. they have a fight, and eventually Superman's able to overpower him, but certainly not without struggle. And we almost see this moment after they've had this struggle, after people have died right before his eyes, where after Superman defeats the Atomic Skull, we see the fist. It's the Arthur fist clench meme of Superman. He's like we said, his buttons are kind of already being pushed even before this group, the Elite, show up, and that's sort of further stated as he's meeting with the UN later on, or I don't know if they say the UN, but it's
the UN. No, it's got the UN logo and stuff like that. They don't say the United Nations, but it says UN.
But yes, and then there's I guess a representative of the United States. He's not the president, I assume, because he's just walking around later with his son by himself.
Right.
But some higher ranking U.S. official is there, sort of half interviewing him, asking him, sort of rhetorically, is Superman the hero we need for the 21st century? Is it right to when Superman has the power to permanently put a stop to somebody like the Atomic Skull, should he be the one to do it? And sort of as they're having this larger friendly discussion, and Superman is sort of trying to appeal to the good nature that he sees, he wants to see the best in the people of the earth. He doesn't want to be a judge and jury here. While he's sort of appealing to that good nature, a shouting match breaks out between the leaders of two countries who are sort of on the brink of an inter-country war, a sort of civil war in the region, and we see that's really escalated in the next scene, as there's not only soldiers attacking each other, but then there's just a giant monster.
Yeah.
And we'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about the fight scenes a lot, probably more in visuals. But here's where we are introduced to our mysterious supergroup known as the Elite, as they help take Superman down. We have Manchester Black, the leader, who's sort of has a grab bag of sort of vague psychic power.
The old telekinesis randomizer. What do you need the telekinesis to be able to do? Read minds? Got it. He can read minds. He can also speak into someone's mind. He can also, affect their brain. He can do all kinds of crazy things.
Absolutely. We have a Cold Cast, who's the big bruiser of the team, has sort of another like nuclear powered guy there. We have Menagerie, or Pam, as she is known in this movie, who may have the most vague powers of all. She just has like weird snakes that come out of her, and also she has wings, and she has some sort of alien reptiles that live in her body, I guess, and come out somewhat to help
I'd say
her.
Demonic. She's got like a demon.
Yes. Okay.
Her leech. She's got like leeches that crawl out of her body, and as we see later, infect people's brains. And I think there's some sort of intimated demonic type possession there.
And last but not least, we have the Hat, who is the mystical member of the team, has all kinds of strange creatures and powers that he can literally pull out of his hat. So we have the team on the scene, and they help Superman defeat these giant sort of biological creatures that have sprung up, that are being used as weapon in this civil war. And Superman thanks them for their help, and they agree that they'll sort of meet up later to learn a little bit more about each other. And it's still very friendly at this point. They're almost sort of starstruck by Superman, if anything.
You sure know how to make an entrance. Thanks for the assist. Next time, double check for collateral damage. Came a little close there. Hello.
You're really tall.
Don't mind them, Mr. Superman, sir. Big fans. Paralytic with giddiness. So before anyone does anything embarrassing, ta.
Wait, who are you?
Yeah, I will just add, one of the things that they do touch on is that Superman is sort of, I would say, holding back a little bit as this Pakistani bioweapon is released. And as you mentioned, it's a giant monster bug looking thing. And he initially sort of is just kind of punching it and kind of going about it as if it were a living being. And Manchester makes sure that he tells him, he said, "Hey, look, this thing isn't living, so you can take the kid gloves off." So it's very well established at that point. Superman then uses his X-ray vision to see that it is a biomechanical weapon. So he does make with the destruction very quickly after that. So that is the one thing that we get established here. Superman, as in most cases, and is in most, not all, thank you, Zack Snyder, but in most cases, does not kill. Of course, he's establishing that he is, of course, the Baron of truth, justice, and the American way, of course. So so we do get some more sort of introductions later on as Superman is formally introduced to this team, the Elite, as he gets their background, and we get Manchester's background. We don't really get the background of the other characters, but we get sort of this origin story where we learn he sort of discovered his powers by accident as a child, and he was the son of an abusive alcoholic father who not only verbally and may have physically abused him, he was abusive towards Manchester's little sister as well. And all of this comes about as retelling stories of how they, in order to survive, they were pickpockets on the street of whatever part of Great Britain he's from.
You would hope Manchester, right?
Yeah, you would think that. Maybe too on the nose. I don't know. He's from Leeds. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the black is short for Blackpool. We don't know.
There you go. Okay. Hey, I like where your head's at. We're just creating the backstory here. We don't have. So he was on the street. They were survivors, and in a bit where his sister was in mortal danger, almost getting hit by a train, he was able to use his telekinesis to protect her. From that point on, he became part of the government's property, and they then used him until he was able to sort of win his freedom, I guess, at that point. And so he establishes that they look up to Superman, and they see him as a hero of theirs, and they're all acting sort of very in awe of him as we kind of move on from there. They're also within, like, I don't think this is the scene they establish it, but they also have this living spaceship, which was not a
Bunny
part of the comic. Yeah, Bunny, the spaceship. So not too shortly after this, as they return, Superman returns back to Metropolis to see if he can get additional information about this elite group. We do see that there is another tragedy occurring, and I guess it's also in England. Is it I think it's in England also. It seems to be across the pond. And there are two subway cars or trains that are stuck in a tunnel that is being attacked. There's a terrorist attack that is causing the tunnel to flood. These two subway trains are going to drown with full of people. So Superman goes over and attempts to try and do what he can to solve the problem, but it's very, very apparent very quickly that it's going to be more than a one-man job. So just in time, the Elite arrive to lend their support to Superman, and he begins sort of orchestrating how the rescue mission is going to go and imploring them to think outside the box, use their imagination. If they can't simply just teleport people out of the tunnel, what are they going to do? And
Captain?
Thank God. We have simultaneous attacks at both openings. The trains are trapped inside, filled to capacity. Flooding has begun to
Melt the blockage to slag and drag the lorries out.
No time. The superstructure has been compromised. Collapse is imminent.
Can you teleport the passengers?
Teleport pods back home, mate. We're great kicking the snot out of wankers. But this
is a test of your imagination. How strong are you?
They set off on a pretty unique and interesting way of doing so, as Superman has to tunnel below the water, sort of cut out the square in which the train resides, and then lift it up with the help of Manchester, and then Hat uses magic to freeze the water so that they can lay the tunnel back down right on the frozen spot in the water so that people can be rescued. And it's at that time that we see that Manchester has caught up to a couple of the terrorists involved in the attack and begins questioning them, asking them, who they're working for and who's behind it all. And they're not too eager to share this information. And because of that, it's very apparent very quickly that Superman might have his hands full here as Manchester begins to sort of we see blood appear from behind their eyes, out of their nose and ears. So he's doing something to create a mess within their skulls, to crush their brains, I suppose. And Superman yells at him to stop, that's not the way. They're not going to be the ones to serve justice. And we have our first initial sort of butting of heads here.
Not bad for a guy who just kicks the snot out of wankers.
Well, I'll be damned. We did it.
Looks like you guys are going to need a name soon.
Guess what we found?
Bastards!
Manchester!
Who put you up to this?
Easy, Manchester.
Not chatty? Fine. Pakolistani tweaked about England's support of Bialia.
You're killing them! Stop!
Can't just let them get away with it, though, can we?
We won't, but not like that.
Why the hell not? No less than they deserve. Call this one a win and save the philosophy for the pub, then.
Definitely.
This team kind of reminds me of like The Boys. It's kind of like the modern day version of this team, the Elite.
I was going to say, yeah, the writer of both the film and the comic, Joe Kelly, mentioned, I think specifically the Authority from Wildstorm was kind of the big was one of his big big inspirations for this. And we've talked about the Authority, I think, a very long time ago when we covered the Justice Lords episode, because that was also kind of the basis for that version of the Justice League. But basically just taking that idea of, well, if there were superpowered people in the real world, would they, have deference to any governing bodies? Would they play by the rules of the world when no one could stop them from doing otherwise? And so this is so introducing a team like that into what is a more sort of more morally black and white world of DC Comics is definitely. I think it definitely feels that way, and absolutely, I think things like The Boys and Invincible and other really popular sort of mega franchises on their own now all kind of can take a lot of inspiration from that, from this, and from, of course, that original Wildstorm Authority run as well.
For sure. Well, it's at this point that as Superman heads back home, suddenly appearing across a worldwide broadcast, thanks to his little cameras that I couldn't help but think looked exactly like TIE fighters the entire time. But his little cameras that are broadcasting across the world, we learned that Manchester is announcing that the Elite are here to stay. He's sort of introducing himself to the public at large and letting them know that people that are in the underworld, people that are shadow governments and puppets are best be on the lookout, because they're going to be dealt with swiftly and lethally.
Evening, morning, and afternoon to one and all, wherever you happen to be. Please forgive this brief but important message regarding the safety of the civilized world.
How are they doing this? Can you do this?
This is a call out to the Shadow Cabinet, petty dictators and all-round tossers of the world. You're on notice. We're not bound by lines on a map or political alliances or governing bodies of any kind. We are our own bosses, and we have a very simple job. There are the good guys, namely us, and the bad guys, namely anyone who treats anyone else like trash to further their petty aims. We turn bad guys into memories. So mind your manners, lads and lasses, or we'll blow your house down. We're the Elite. You asked for us, world. Now you got us.
At least they picked a name. Clark?
See, Dad? That's how you do it. No one's gonna pull something with the elite watching.
Everyone likes a shiny new penny. It doesn't mean that...
Lois, get your coat.
And this is met with thunderous applause from a lot of the people that are apparently watching it. So they're excited to see some swift justice handed out to who they think it is deserving of it. And yeah, I think we know where this is headed coming up next here.
Absolutely. So there, at that moment, there seems to be trouble in one of these sort of fictional warring nations of Bialia, and as Superman goes to investigate, there's a giant sort of blue explosion of energy that hits him as he's flying in, and seems to not only cause quite a bit of distress in the city, Superman as well. And as he's sort of trying to get his bearings, some of the invading soldiers look to pull their guns on him, and things aren't looking too good for our hero. But then the elite comes in, even after their declaration of "don't get in our way." They make a point of, they do save Superman's life, but they do so by lethally disposing of the soldiers that the guns at him. And before Superman can really protest, he passes out, as we find out that it was a cold cast induced slumber for him, thanks to this neutrino pulse that he puts out, that apparently some sort of nuclear explosion that directly targets neurological function. You know, one of those.
We told you it was a grab bag of smorgasbord of whatever the hell, a cornucopia of different powers.
Absolutely,
this young man has.
Absolutely. So as Superman sort of comes to, he is on the aforementioned, which we find out is some sort of sentient technology that not only allows the elite to teleport wherever they need to be, but also gives them an ability to sort of stay out of the any sort of prying eyes. No satellites, not even Superman can find them, because it's sort of constantly shifting through dimensions. And as we sort of find out that Manchester Black and the Hat have also sort of taken away its free will. It is alive in some way, but it had some sort of emotional intelligence to it. But Black is suppressing that with his powers, and perhaps with Hat's magic. So Superman is sort of still recovering from the attack in the previous. He's trying to reason with them. He's trying to tell Black specifically that, you know, they can't be judge, jury, and executioner. They can't go down this path. It's too dangerous. It won't end well. But Black simply isn't really interested in hearing it. And before Superman can really directly confront them, as he becomes he's teleported back to Earth, and and sort of made to look a bit of a fool as he's standing in the middle of a used car lot with a giant inflatable Superman, which is a pretty humorous little bit there. And we get a brief scene of Clark talking to Pa Kent, who sort of tries to reinforce that, hey, ultimately Superman stands for the right things, and you just got to stay the course and stick to your guns and stick to your morals. And ultimately this elite, this flavor of the month, may have some support now, but people will come to their senses if you just if you keep showing them the right way to do things.
Been a lot of talk, not much of it good. Had to put a slap on Ben Farnsworth on account he said you looked the fool.
I did, Pa.
They sucker punched you.
Sucker teleported, technically. So even Smallville's rooting for the elite.
Well, just the loud, angry, and stupid.
Come on, it's not that simple. I don't think that I make them feel safe anymore. The way I do things.
Clark, when people are scared, they have a tendency to hop on a bandwagon before they see who's driving it. But when they wise up, and believe me, they will, what matters is that you'll be there for them, leading by example, just like always. Truth, justice, and the American way. It ain't broke, so don't fix it.
Thanks, Pa.
Besides, if those knuckleheads don't quit tugging on your cape, you can always kick their self-righteous asses to Kingdom Come.
That the Atomic Skull has once again broken out of prison, is going on yet another rampage, which Superman and the Elite are, after a great deal of struggle by both Superman and the Elite, still working together after their differences. Finally, they're able to stop him. Cold Cast is able to drain the nuclear out of the Atomic Skull, although in the process, the U.S. official who was sort of supporting Superman and his young son are sort of caught in the crossfire, and that official dies, and the son is sort of becoming more and more of a disciple of the Elite. Asks Manchester Black to kill the Atomic Skull in retaliation for the damage that he's caused, and Superman is not quick enough to stop him, and the skull quite literally, his head explodes,
Mm-hmm.
and Superman throws the first punch here, and knocks Black into a wall, but again, before Chekhov's teleporting a live spaceship comes back and teleports they can have the full confrontation, and then there's sort of one more mini confrontation a few scenes later as this civil war is still escalating, and we see fighter jets from one city about to bomb a heavily populated area. Superman himself actually intervenes this time and disarms all of the planes and tries to sort of that cool heads can prevail, but as Manchester Black and Cold Cast show up, they reveal that, well, things have already sort of escalated beyond Superman's control, as while Superman was dealing with these fighter planes and saving innocent lives, other members of the Elite were in fact killing every single political leader in both countries, and so they've sort of made their peace, and it's time to end this. It's time for the showdown. Once again, Superman is pretty overmatched, but before they decide they're not going to have this final fight here, and Manchester, being sort of a theatrical sort of cat, is willing to give some time to get his. They have this final showdown, and it should be mentioned maybe one or two scenes before this, I think we forgot to mention, but while Superman has been dealing with all of these different action sequences and battles with the Elite and against the Elite, Lois has actually had a little side quest where she goes to London to try to learn a little bit more about this Manchester Black and his backstory, and a mysterious agent who happens to look and sound an awful lot like Manchester Black's supposedly deceased sister gives Lois a flash drive with some information, and we find out that Manchester Black wasn't quite the tortured heroic soul that perhaps he let on, and that he's always sort of had this dangerous and destructive streak in him, and even sort of using his powers to give the stroke. And so we sort of set up this finale of Superman agreeing to sort of have a showdown literally at dawn. We're going to have a showdown, and we have these vicious, seemingly unstoppable crew against just Superman. And we have actually, I think, maybe my favorite scene, one of my favorite scenes in the movie and in the book, where Lois asks him, they're sort of sitting in their apartment waiting for the next day to dawn for this final fight, and Lois just asks him, why does it have to be you? Why can't it be, we don't see any other costume heroes in this universe, but they are, or in this movie, but they are alluded to. Why does it have to be you? And he says they didn't call out anyone else.
When?
Dawn, I guess. They'll like the drama of that.
Why do you have to do this? Why can't you call someone else?
The Elite didn't take the fight to anyone else. They chose me.
No, you went after them.
They're slaughtering people and laughing about it.
Black can punch a hole through a mountain by thinking. The Hat tosses around demons like trained birds, and Pam...
They have to be stopped.
I think they can beat you. I'm sorry, but they are willing to go places you won't. And they are so damn strong.
I heard a child say that he wanted to be in the elite when he grows up because it would be fun to kill bad guys. Fun to kill. People have to know that there's another way. They have to see that someone believes in humanity strongly enough
To die for them?
Here we are. It's fight night or fight morning, I guess. And it's time for the final countdown here.
That's right. And we also, I don't think, touched on it, but public opinion is also, I guess we sort of mentioned it with the cheers that were given once the elite announced their arrival. But the public opinion has really started to sway in the direction of the elite, and they are being received favorably despite their insistence on being violent, being overlords in deciding who lives and who dies. There's even a report the night before Superman is due to face the elite where they talk about how despite public denouncing of the actual actions by the elite, that there are polls that reveal that a lot of people are in support of the way that they handled the killing of both of the governments, and that the government that that it should be handled between the two of them, and those countries can go figure things out, and the world's a better place because of the actions of the elite. So things are shifting, and that plays into that whole idea of, is Superman still relevant? Is Superman still is his goal of keeping sort of the straight and narrow path of working towards peace and seeing good in people, is that all worth it? And is it still relevant today? Is there still a place for that? Or has everyone become so cynical and so disengaged that they kind of see violence and the people that make swift decisions through violence as the only as the righteous ones, I guess. So yes, we do get we get Superman appearing in the middle of Metropolis to face the elite, but his one last request is that they not face him there in Metropolis to avoid as much destruction as possible. So the elite do indeed honor that request, and Bunny transports them to the surface of the moon. And short of a bell, the match gets started here, as Superman is pretty easily handed his behind pretty quickly and overmatched, as we see the elite working together as a well-oiled machine and unit, doing their best to take down Superman, weakening him to the point where he is falling before Manchester, who is using his powers to give Superman a seizure. Superman is weakly sort of kneeling before him, blood pouring from his eyes and nose, and sort of seizing on the ground. And just as it appears Superman is indeed defeated, Cold Cast comes, and Manchester declares that he give the final blow to Superman, and that he assures them that Superman's days are gone. He's not welcome anymore, and the reign of the elite is here to stay. And just in that moment, Cold Cast hits Superman with a giant blast of electricity, and it appears Superman is reduced to rubble at that point, leaving only behind a piece of his cape. And just as the elite begin to celebrate, we do hear Superman's voice coming out of nowhere. And
right, who else has business to perform on this shroud before we hang it up? I, for one, should like to scrub
I finally get it. Thank you.
No friggin' way.
Cool it, Hat. Cold Cast?
Nothing could've. That was like 15 suns exploding in his face.
I made the mistake of treating you people like people.
No sonar. Can't smell him either. Just scorched air.
But now, I understand better.
I'm getting a tight sphincter here, Chester.
Shut your gob!
I understand now what the world wants. What it needs.
Ow! Something bit me.
Bit you?
Do something!
Do what? He's poisoned the zoo. The buggers won't out.
He is supposed to be dead.
She's not breathing. Damn it, Chester!
She's dead?
Bugger me. He's playing it our way. Leave her. Blister the land and flush him out.
I can't. Not after a blast like that. Call the ship and get Pam to sickbay.
Guys,
The world needs people in charge who are willing to put the animals down.
It's a very Batman-like scene. He starts using fear and intimidation, taking them out one by one as a menagerie suddenly gets hit in the neck with a dart. And she passes out and ultimately seems to die as they can't hear her heartbeat. And as they begin looking around, they see a giant tornado headed towards them as Superman begins to taunt them and say that his eyes have been opened, and he sees that in order to truly defeat the elite, he has to embrace the way that they are and embrace violence and death. So taking them out one by one is the only way to truly defeat them. Hat begins to attempt to defeat Superman with some magic, but as he is drawn into the middle of the tornado, he loses his breath and is sucked away. We learn that Coldcast used up all of his powers in the blast that he thought killed Superman. So at that point, we also know that Manchester can't see or feel Superman's brain to try and affect him in a negative way. So they teleport at that point. He gets Bunny to teleport them directly back to Earth. And he states that there's, that Superman won't fight them there. He's too afraid to kill. And they feel like in that moment they're safe. But of course, Superman does fly back to Earth and arrives right then and there, taking out Coldcast, and then it's just one-on-one between Manchester and Superman. And despite Manchester's pleas and continued mocking of Superman, Superman does indeed continue to fight. There's some fisticuffs that happen, and Manchester disappears, reappearing. And Superman seemingly throws Coldcast into orbit. By the way, I forgot that's how he gets rid of Coldcast. So the battle continues, and eventually they're left face to face. Superman, despite being bloody with a bloodshot eye, and he's got a newfound sense of embracing this love of violence. And Superman uses his heat vision, but Manchester believes he's blocked it, and that there's no way that it could affect him. But we see that Superman actually lobotomized Manchester by shooting heat vision into his eyeballs. Sure. Mm-hmm. And also lobotomizing the part of his brain that he uses to use his powers. So when he goes to use them, Manchester can no longer use his telekinesis. So at this point that Manchester tells Superman that, well, at this point you've lost and I've won anyway, because the world knows that you're no better than us because you're killing. And that's when Superman unveils and reveals that, in fact, it was all a giant ruse. As not only were the people in the city, as they looked around and saw destruction, it's revealed that Superman's robots from the Fortress of Solitude were there to support him and kind of be his own super team behind him, protecting individuals from the destruction that was occurring around them. But then not only were the citizens of Metropolis safe, but Superman reveals that the rest of the elite were simply transported to the Fortress of Solitude in the midst of the tornado by the previously mentioned robots. They all have headaches, but they're not dead, that's for sure. And the people of Earth at that point are sort of their eyes are opened as this was all broadcast, and we see that maybe the way of the Superman is the right way, and this way of violence is not the way that should be embraced. So we do get a sort of happy ending as Superman and Lois fly away, and he remands the elite. They're going to be taken to a super max prison of some kind, and they will face justice another day. But we get Superman and Lois flying off into the sunrise, and that is the end of our movie. It's puts a nice little bow on things. Truth, justice, in the American way lives, and Superman is indeed still relevant, I'd say.
Absolutely. So as we begin to wrap up, before we give our scores here, I guess just big picture, like we sort of touched on at the beginning, this heads into territory that we've talked about in depth not too long ago. That being the idea of how does Superman fit into the world? Although interestingly, rather than looking at it, as we said in the previous movie, they're both looking at Superman as a metaphor for America to an extent, for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of the Justice League Unlimited story arc, it's more about what he's doing and the lines he is crossing, whether he means to or not.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of needs to examine himself and reevaluate and not take those risks, not step over those lines. Whereas this is sort of asking not quite the opposite question, but sort of looking at him in that same way and going, well, but shouldn't he? Shouldn't he be, punching the Atomic's skull's head off his shoulders?
Right.
Instead of letting him, turn people into ash right in front of him.
Right.
Shouldn't he be stepping in when, political leaders are starving their own people and causing all of this death and destruction? And I think we come to it at this conclusion, which is what that whole final battle is about. And we'll certainly talk more about that in visuals in a minute here. But it comes to this point where we go, maybe there should be somebody that has that role in the world, but it shouldn't be him.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we take a fictional character like Superman, and imprint onto him our own inadequacies as a species,
mm-hmm.
It doesn't make him, to me, it doesn't make him more interesting or more relatable. It makes him terrifying.
Mm.
It makes him unpleasant to watch.
Right.
And I think that's what's so great about this story, is that you can argue that there should be more intervention, especially in a fictional world like this, where somebody can literally, can crack a planet in half by listening real hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you have people with these, extraordinary abilities, and say, yeah, maybe he should be more proactive. And we see him be a little bit more proactive as far as like, disarming the planes without killing a single person. He kind of makes that statement that, hey, maybe I do need to be a little bit more proactive, but I can't, there's still certain things that I can't do. All I can be is the example. I can be the fireman. I can do my best to make sure nobody gets hurt, or as few people as possible get hurt, but I can't be the guy who rounds up everybody who sets a fire,
Right.
And I think that's what makes this story so interesting, and what makes the conclusion where we see him, though it turns out to not be true, step over that line, and how uncomfortable it is, where even, the son of the US official is in the streets going, but it can't be, Superman can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like we may long for a big strong man or a group of people to quote unquote solve all of our problems through, and threaten violence against anyone who we see as a danger. But when we put that into action, it doesn't work. All right.
Right.
Like it's, I don't know if I'm
no, I think
I look at this particularly well.
No, I think I agree with you in the way that a flawed Superman, or a character with Superman's powers that is flawed, has been done so much that I think that's what separates Superman from those other characters. That's one point for sure. Yeah, we don't need another flawed Superman story. We don't need a Superman who's struggling with being a good guy. Like we don't need that. Right. I do like the idea that he is, despite the temptation that he is set up as, hey, look, I'm not I very well could do all this stuff, but my belief is in the system or the people that are working within the system to choose good. He has faith in humanity, right? Like that's ultimately it's repeated over and over and over again. I think that the flaw with that is that in real life, the people that have the most power oftentimes are the people that are the most corrupt or the most untrustworthy people that you can imagine. So it is hard for us in a way to suspend disbelief and say, how could the person with the most power, being Superman, not embrace that role and ultimately turn, in some way, use that power for evil? It is a difficult concept, I think, for us to wrap our head around, because it is such an alien idea. Even the most revered, loved politician, world leader, whatever figure you want to look at,
celebrities, athletes, any of it,
exactly, there is a deeply flawed. They're deeply flawed individuals. Like they have the ability to use whatever gifts they've been given to hopefully push more good than bad, but we know that they're still flawed individuals. So I think what you're getting at, or what's communicating there, is yes, it is an interesting idea that he is so, and I think this is what we've talked about over the last 257 prior episodes, whenever we've had the opportunity to talk about Superman and why you love the character, especially the classic portrayal of Superman, is that he is just, at his core, he is inherently good. And there are very few examples that we can look to especially in today, whether it's political, in celebrity culture, in athlete, influencer, whatever you want to look at, where you can look at somebody and say that person is inherently good, because every day there is a story that comes out about the person that you think is the best person in the world, or the nicest or least flawed person, and you're like, man, that is a really crappy thing, or that is a really bad thing. So I mean, it leads back to the idea of Superman as a Christ-like figure. You have a person that is perfect, that is unable, that has no flaws, that is selfless, that embraces peace and love of your fellow man, and a desire to uphold the right, things that are right, and fight for the underprivileged, and all of those things. Like, so I think because of just the nature of the world, it is very difficult to marry those two concepts together and not think that the best person that ever existed would not somehow grab this power and be beholden to it and use it for their own personal gain. I love that is who Superman is, and I think it fits into that religious Christ type imagery that Superman so often portrays. But it is often alien because we don't have that in human beings, or a physical example to represent that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you really kind of hit a nail on your head. And like those those powerful religious figures like Jesus, like Moses, we see him tempted to go the other way. We see the forces of the world beating down on him, and literally, in this case, he gets beat up a lot in this. but we see, and we see, like we said, we see the fist clenching, we see the kind of the anger burning in his eyes, we see feeling like I could just go over that line for a second, and I could solve so much, I could do so much. But knowing he wouldn't be this aspirational figure that people have loved for 85 years, he wouldn't be he wouldn't be the champion of the oppressed, one of his original monikers when he was created by, two Jewish men in the 1930s. Like he'd be the oppressor.
Right. Precisely.
And I think that's why this story is so wonderful and is such a fun, like I said, I think it's fun to test him. I think it's fun to push him to that edge, but it's ultimately, to me, why I find the quote unquote the real Superman so much more interesting than The Boys or Invincible or some of those more flawed takes. Not that those don't have their own merits and aren't in their own, but to me, it's much more interesting to me, as you said, Cal, to have a character who has this ability and chooses to use it only to help people and only to set an example rather than set laws himself. And so yeah, I think overall, as we actually get into, now that we've sort of touched on the larger ideals, I will say, as we mentioned at the start, this was an adaptation of a single issue of a comic. I think there are a little bit of a pacing issue, or not pacing necessarily, but I feel like we hit the same beats over and over again to an extent. Like there's 3 or 4 scenes in a row where Superman and the Elite kind of have the same argument, and they almost come to blows, or maybe even a punch is thrown, but then we back off. And like I said, that isn't to say it isn't still an enjoyable watch, but I do think in this example, this story works better on the page maybe than it does as a movie, or at least with the way it was laid out here, where we just sort of have, we have a little bit of a feeling out process where they're working together, and maybe he thinks he can kind of mentor them and bring them into the fold as regular old DC Comics heroes. And then as the trust sort of very quickly breaks down, and we just see it, like I said, I feel like we hit some of the same beats, and then once it feels like it's ready, like I said, after the fight with Atomic Skull, it feels like, okay, we're ready for this final showdown now. We have to do the one more bit with the planes in the middle, which kind of again reinforces what we've already sort of established, which is that they're willing to kill and they want to be judge, jury, and executioner. And he is now firmly standing, he's not just condemning them, he's now standing in opposition to him. So it feels like there's like at least an extra 10 minutes or so that maybe we don't need, but then it's maybe not long enough to be a movie. So that might be more of the stresses of just the format this was adapted into, rather than I wouldn't say any of these scenes on their own are bad, at least not in my opinion, but it does feel like once we get the initial meeting, we get a little bit of the philosophical conflict, then we get the physical conflict, it's time, and then we do a little bit more meandering, and then we get the big bombastic finale.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you. And it's interesting that this is probably the second or third full-length movie that we've covered from the direct-to-video movies, and we had the exact opposite complaint about the Under the Red Hood movie, which was based on so many issues of the comic, and it felt like they decided that every single plot point from that 12 or whatever it was 13 issue run had to be jammed into this movie, where it just created so many things that felt like, hey, this could have been cut, this didn't need to be involved, you could have left this part out, maybe you smooth this part over, maybe you combine these two things. It would have been it, and that was our main complaint when we reviewed that movie, was it just felt so jam-packed. It is an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. So it is not a long runtime necessarily, but it definitely does feel like it's action heavy. It feels like at times, though, it was like, what is the point of this scene other than to continue to drive home the same point that we've established? So I did like some of the beats that kind of broke things up. I thought the Smallville scene with him talking with Ma and Pa Kent was great, and that was taken directly from the issue as well. But some of the other stuff that was kind of established, or that was thrown in there, to really kind of drive home the idea that Superman had lost faith from the public. They added the UN official storyline and his son.
Mhm.
And Atomic Skull was also not in the original issue, so we get him brought in. So that's another added thing. As we mentioned, I think the story of the teleporting bunny character was not in the original thing. So
yeah, that's a holdover, I think, from the Authority comic too. They have like a super secret dimensional shifting fortress as well, but in the comic it just kind of it shows up once or twice, but they don't talk about it being like this sentient being and all that.
Right. Which again, I mean, I get it. You have to make this worth it. It can't be a 45-minute movie that you're going to charge whatever it was at the time, $20 or whatever it was when it came out on video. So you had to make it worth the while. But yeah, I think overall I do like the concept. I do like the fact that at the end of the day it is relative to what we see nowadays. I mean, how many times have we talked about is the general conjecture of like dark, gritty is just so overdone in superhero movies. Now, you could argue that the latest Batman movie was dark and gritty in some ways, but I think that they also addressed that within the own movie. But Batman also is a dark, gritty superhero, so we recognize that for certain things the tone should be, but with Superman, it should be lighter. It should be less heavy. It should be less dark. To kind of convey those character traits. So I do like that it's relevant in that way. I do like that it does touch on some of the things, the ideas of, the US being the good guys, and to violence is the way that we establish that we're the good guys. And, there's certainly some political, the media stifling different, pushing narratives. I thought that I was like, man, this could be played today. This media choosing to push one narrative of the elite being the heroes. I thought that was interesting, but there's certainly lots of relative good things that touched on. Some of it has been touched on to the point of probably being overdone a little bit, but again, this was 10 years ago. This is before Batman v Superman. This is before the entire Snyderverse existed, and a lot of the critique I feel like has come from that. So prior to The Boys, prior to Invincible, all that stuff being more in the mainstream. So it does a fine job, I think, of balancing what it had to do. Again, I love the idea of trying a stab at an important story like this that was, rather than just nailing one of the hits, because that seems to be one of the things that people just expect, is that they're just going to cover all the hits. We're going to do Hush. We're going to do Superman Doomsday. We're going to do Blackest Night. We're going to do Under the Red Hood. I don't think you would have picked this issue out of probably thousands of ideas before they decided to go with it. So the fact that they picked a random issue or a memorable but maybe not top tier issue of Superman to turn into the film is certainly commendable. I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10 for the plot. There are points that I love, but there are periods, as we talked about, that just feel like fluff and runtime padding. So yeah, that's why I ended up with a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just 1 point higher. I went 7 out of 10. Like I said, I like the overall ideals of this. I love the comic. I genuinely. It's by the way, it's a free issue on the wonderful DC Universe app if you're if you're in the US right now. So you could read this digitally for free, or perhaps head to your local comic store and pick up a used copy as well. But I really do recommend people read the issue, because I think as a standalone comic book, it's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, for all the reasons we've covered, I love what it does. I love an examination of Superman like this, especially when it has the resolution that it does. But yeah, just like I said, I think we got maybe we take a couple too many left turns in the middle of the movie, just kind of just spinning our wheels before we get it back on track for the finale. So but still, I think a pretty enjoyable time. Still a lot to sink your teeth into, especially from, as we've just spent quite a while talking about, the sort of the philosophical side of Superman and these characters that we all love so much. And from there, Cal, we will move into the visual and animation section of our show. Once again, this piece was directed by Michael Chang, and the animation was provided by Telecom Animation Film. So we have some pretty. It's a new world, like we said, just completely new character designs done for this movie. John Suzuki was lead character designer on this show, has worked as a character designer on quite a few other projects, including animated shows like Teen Titans and several of the other direct-to-video animated films. Overall, what stands out to you about the look of this particular film?
It's certainly unique. I don't think it truly captures, and well, it doesn't really capture what the original issue looked like. It reminded me more of modern day Frank Miller drawings than anything.
Superman's very wide.
Yes, tends to have a large chin. There's times where he looks just like big and hulking, and I think compared to what we're used to, modern day Superman, while tends to be muscular, maybe in the animated portrayals of the Man of Steel, I will say that this one made him a hulking Man of Steel for sure. He's got broad shoulders, big chest, big chin, big eyes. Everybody is big mouth, big teeth. Like, he's just big guy. Big Blue, I guess. So yeah, I think initially I was concerned that it would be distracting, but I think because it's an hour and 12 minutes, you get used to it very quickly. There is certainly some Eastern animation influence in the way that some of the characters look. Lois, I would say, tends to have more of an Eastern animation influence. But I think overall everybody looks interesting and is eye-catching, and you settle into things, as it goes on. I'd say there's a couple of scenes where Superman looks even more sort of cartoonish or caricature-ish in some of the scenes. His features are really exaggerated, and you get a lot of close-ups of his face, especially in some of the fight scenes. But I imagine with a full-length feature film that you have, different storyboard artists and maybe different parts of the animation studio doing different parts. So that may have led to some of the inconsistency in how the characters looked from part to part. But I think overall everybody looks interesting. The Elite, I'll say Manchester Black certainly lines up with the way that he looks in the comic, as far as having the purple hair and the Union Jack shirt and the black overcoat and all of that. Cold Cast, a little bit different. He looks a little bit more like what's the Teen Titans villain that works with what's his name? Not Wildebeest. What's his name? Blanking on it.
Mammoth.
Yeah. He reminded me more of like Mammoth. Like he's built to be like a big hulking type creature, despite being a human. So Hat's interesting. There's lots of things that they do with his character design throughout, and Menagerie is certainly probably the most visually interesting of all of the outside of Manchester Black for that team. But I think overall, I think the design of the series, while not lining up with how the artwork for the comic looked, has its own style and flow. And there are a lot of scenes in the movie that were, I don't want to use the word breathtaking because that seems to be too superfluous too cliched to say, but there were a lot of scenes that were like, man, that scene looks really good. The Smallville scene with with where they're eating the pie on the Kent farm porch. You get this beautiful setting sun, and just the way that the hues in that scene, the oranges and the reds, the way that the whole scene is lit is just creates this warmth that goes along with Pa Kent. Like when you think Pa Kent, you think warmth, you think comfort, you think he's there to give Superman the advice, and that's what that whole scene is about. And I think the coloration and the setting and everything, and the pie that they're eating, all of that just feeds into like, this is Superman regrouping, this is Superman getting comforted, and all these things kind of are what gives the most powerful being in the world comfort. Is just this simple type of life and watching the sun set with his parents in Smallville, Kansas. But yeah, what about you? What did you think about the way that the designs of the characters and the way that this whole film was animated?
Yeah, I think this definitely, like, there's certain sequences, especially with cold casts, that felt like almost they were coming out of Dragon Ball Z or something. Maybe because the big blue energy thing that Superman gets caught in at one point. I was like, I think that's there's a term for that in Dragon Ball Z. It's like a spirit bomb, I think.
Okay.
I've never seen an episode, but it's like a big blue power orb of energy that one of the guys shoots. Somebody can, people listening to this are pulling their hair out because I'm getting the lore wrong, and I apologize. But yeah, so I definitely felt like there's a lot of Eastern animation, like a lot of big like energy, different colored energies clashing and smashing against each other, with Superman's heat vision going against sort of this. They sort of visualize Manchester Black's powers with this sort of like green and black energy, that shoots out of his eyes, and that he sort of sometimes can even shoot out like it's almost like it's a laser beam itself or something like that. So the way a lot of those different types of energy, the big power up moments, I think that's all quite fun, and definitely I felt was pretty reminiscent of sort of a fight scene you would see in some of those more popular Eastern animation projects as well. So I definitely felt like that influence was there. The designs themselves, I think maybe that plays into the story a little bit, of you have this sort of big, broad, almost, I don't think goofy is the right word I would use, but this very, like you said, just this big, wide, big chin, grinning Superman, contrasted against these, like, the demonic girl with the devil wings and the punk rock dude and all of this big hulking guy who's is like blind in one eye and all of that, and the cool like hipstery dude with the with the hat. So I think it almost does help to have sort of a more broad, over the top Superman design. I think it better contrasts him with the again, not that there's like a realism attempted with any of the characters in this. It's very, like I said, it's very colorful and over the top in all of the character designs. But I definitely think they're being sort of people in these sort of very edgy outfits, whereas Superman's still this big beefcake in red and blue tights and with a big red cape. I think that contrast works really well as well. And then, of course, we'd be remiss not to talk a bit more in length, I guess, about that. The final fight scene first, the beating that Superman takes from the from the Elite. As mentioned, we get a lot of blood as he kind of does the same thing we see him do earlier in the movie, where he's messing with his his capillaries and bursting blood vessels in his face to make his eyes bleed and all of that. And then we get this giant explosion of energy, and then once Superman, goes bad, quote unquote, where we just, and we'll certainly talk about that in voice acting in a couple minutes here, but where we just kind of see little glimpses, or we see him creating a tornado, and we just see like a figure with red eyes, again, very demonic in that moment, sort of just this force of nature coming towards the hat and all of that. And I think it's fun. And then we get this deranged sort of over the top look in his eyes, where he has this eye that's gone completely red from blood, and as he's just sort of giving this dramatic and over the top, quite frankly, villainous monologue to Manchester Black in the final sequence, I think is really quite striking, and adds to what we've already talked about in the plot of this feeling of just complete dread and uncomfortability that you feel when it seems like maybe Superman has crossed the line in that moment. So, like I said, all things considered, I think it did take a little while to settle into. But overall, I really enjoyed the visuals, and I thought the animation itself, especially in all of the action sequences, this is a very action heavy movie. I thought I had to give this a pretty strong 8 out of 10 for my visual score.
Nice. Yeah, I gave it the same exact score. Just hitting on some of the highlights. I'll say, kind of starting from the beginning, they did use CGI in some of the sequences based on how the camera work went through, and they did do the cell shading on top of it. Obviously, this is almost a decade after the Justice League Unlimited somewhat debacle of things that I would call it, of using those CGI ships and planes and cars and vehicles. And it seems that the more modern way of doing things is to cell shade on top of it. And there are a couple sequences where you can certainly tell that it's CGI, but especially I think in the first scene with Superman versus the Atomic Skull. But it's camouflaged well enough and things move smoothly enough where it doesn't stand out as being an eyesore. So kudos to them on that. I will say also that one of the things that we talked about, of course, in the plot is the idea that they really wanted to get across that Superman was just such an inherently good character. And one of the things that I picked up on that they did is in this in the discovery as Manchester Black is telling Superman his backstory. He actually goes through his brain and allows him to see the vision that he creates a vision for Superman to see of his backstory. And in the telling of the story of his sister nearly getting hit by the train, she falls off a platform as she's being chased by 2 police officers in front of the oncoming train. And they made sure to animate Superman almost reaching out. He reaches out and lurches towards her as if he could save her, which I was just like, that is so subtle, but so effective in communicating that this man is so inherently good that he can't help himself but try and save this child in a vision.
Yeah.
Like what a really fun little tiny way of storytelling and really hammering home the idea. Like, you can say it as much as you want to. You can have him, be corny or say the lines or whatever, and show him, trying to protect people or, not killing the bad guys. But that's just something that's so subtle that to me drove the idea home that he's so good. He's trying to save a mirage in this vision that this character is showing him. So cool. I loved that. So there's some stuff, by the way. I encourage you, not only if you're going to watch this, but to make sure you go back and read the issues we've already suggested. But there are some panels that they directly did lift visuals from. The one scene where Superman's flying around, he's kind of eavesdropping, and he sees the group of kids that are playing, and the one group of kids are sort of bullying. The one group of kids dressed like the Elite are bullying the kid dressed like Superman, making him be Superman because he's like the smaller, weaker kid. That panel is directly lifted from the comic. I appreciated that. And so I, go back and kind of do the compare and contrast for sure to look at those. But yeah, a lot of murder in this movie. Not only Atomic Skull, of course, kind of evaporating people. I like the way that they visualize that. They turn gray and sort of dissipate almost into sand. Based on his nuclear energy. He's a cool looking character, also a very different look than what we saw him in Justice League Unlimited. That one, he's Dayglow green. Here he's got like a purple hue, and his skull itself is sort of floating in his head. And so it's obvious the same character, but definitely a different color palette used. So I appreciated that. And he actually kind of goes through this metamorphosis through the entire movie is he mentions kind of an offhand quote at the beginning of the movie that the atomic bomb that went off creating him continues to go off inside of him, so there's still a reaction that's occurring, so it kind of he begins getting larger as the movie goes on. The killing of Atomic Skull was interesting too, because there's slow motion that's used in that sequence, and then his skull bursting into like 100 pieces. It's just not a visual that I will forget anytime soon. I think just some of the set pieces also that they chose. I already mentioned Smallville. I love Lois and Clark's apartment. It just feels cozy and small, and feels like a little home for them.
Speaking of visual things with Lois and Clark, like they're very like physically affectionate with each other in like a way that feels like a couple that's been together for a long time are. Like it's very effortless, and we'll talk about that more in voice acting, but there's just little ways, even in that last scene before the final fight where they're at the apartment and they're watching TV, the way he just kind of tries to put his arm around her and comfort her and all of that. Like there's some really nice sort of simple little flourishes in the visuals that I think help inform that story and make you feel like they truly care for each other.
Absolutely. And I think the other set piece that I really appreciated, they do visit the Fortress of Solitude a couple of times, but there's a scene that where the elite show up in the fortress and Superman is sitting on this giant ice throne, which just a really cool visual, and he's sitting there kind of monitoring things, and they have this whole talk back and forth, and he's talking to Lois, and it's a really great set piece, just some great painted backgrounds by the visual artists there. And the last bit, other than the final battle, I think there's plenty that could be talked about in there. It's definitely brutal, and I like the set piece of taking place on the moon, which of course also was taken from the comic. But I think the disarming of the planes that Superman does, that whole sequence is so fun, because you just see these fighter jets that are on their way to attack this other country, and then all of a sudden pieces start coming off of the planes. Pieces start coming out of it. You're not quite sure. You start to see this red blue blur come in and out of the scene. Then you start to see, planes dropping. And then you really see, of course, heat vision come out and disarm some of the missiles. And then you start to see Superman come in and take out some of the pilots. And eventually they land on just sort of this sequence that's on the ground. And you start seeing planes drop into frame, and then a pilot drop, and then Superman swoops down, and then he swoops out of frame, and then another piece of the plane drops, and there are people just kind of standing there reacting. It's a really fun sequence, and we'll talk about it in a second, but I thought the music accompanying it was great also. But yeah, 8 out of 10 from both of us. I think that's pretty strong for maybe not what we would point to as maybe our favorite animation look of all time, but I think there's a lot to appreciate for how this thing comes together in the different sequences.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Cal, we will move on from there to our music section. We have Robert J. Kral on as the composer for this week's movie. Done a lot of the other direct-to-video DC movies, as well as other TV and film here. What stood out to you about the score? We definitely have like a Superman theme, a heroic theme that plays throughout the movie that I enjoyed. Though I want to say something that I wish they maybe, I don't know how this would have worked. Maybe it would have clashed with the pun intended with the main score, but our title sequence for this film has this this kind of like Ramones, The Clash knockoff. Like Rancid type thing, real fast drums, real punk rock, 70s punk rock feel to it. And I was kind of hoping that would come back as like the Elite theme throughout it, but we don't get that. But definitely I think some highlights to talk about when it comes to music this week. What stood out for you?
Yeah, the first thing I had was actually the opening sequence, which was so vastly different from the rest of the music. It definitely has more of that maybe it was an homage to the British punk rock music scene, since we have Manchester Black as our leader of the elite. I like that it was paired. We didn't talk about it in visuals, but there's also animation from the Super Friends, from Superman the Animated Series, from the Fleischer cartoons. I imagine one of those other sort of offshoot Superman cartoons also that came after Super Friends.
Yeah.
But the visuals
some
that
panels
accompany
that. from the looks like from the 40s and 50s as well.
Yeah, that opening sequence was incredible. I loved it. It was really, really, really cool to watch, and certainly the music accompanying it made it stand out. But yeah, I think not to say run of the mill, but I think it's standard fare for a lot of the film for the music, what you would expect for a score for a feature length movie. A lot of strings, a lot of professional sounding orchestral music throughout. We do get a Superman theme that I did see was mentioned. We have not covered it here on the program, but it's the same theme that was used for the first direct-to-video DC project, which was the Superman Doomsday movie, not the one that came out later on that was a part of the DC animated movie universe, the Tuckerverse one, but it's the very first one that sort of somewhat looks like a Bruce Timm designed animation studio did it. So I like the Superman theme. I think it's definitely different than maybe what we're used to with Shirley Walker, John Williams' Superman theme. It's not those ones that stand out. And when you have two mammoth, memorable, like heartstring pulling themes like those two are for us and so many other people, it's hard to measure up with just another. You're like, oh yeah, this is the Superman theme. You're like, okay, it works. Like, it works for it, but it's like following the Beatles or following Elvis or something like that. It's like, how do you do that? Like, how do you follow up some of the greatest compositions of all time with something that's unique and that sort of still conveys the heroic nature of the Man of Steel? It's a good theme. I think it plays well into this. We hear it throughout. We certainly hear it played sort of in a more menacing minor key in the way that when Superman seems to be embracing the idea of being evil and using his powers to kill the elite. So I did like that. But I think the only other thing, and we never know where to insert this, whether it's music or voice acting, or we don't really have a spot for it. But I will say that the sound design for that biomechanical creature in that first scene, I don't know if you caught it, but it sounded to me like they took the Man-Bat sound from Batman.
There was definitely some Man-Bat Venus flytrap sound in there.
Absolutely. That was my other thing. It was like Man-Bat, Venus flytrap, and maybe a little Chewbacca in there. You had that all kind of mixed in there together, but it made the sound the first time, and I was like, man, that sounds like Man-Bat. Did I hear that wrong? And then 2 seconds later it happened again. I was like, no, it's definitely Man-Bat. But as far as the music is concerned, I think it fits the movie well. It is certainly feature-length film quality, and the Superman theme, I think, played heroically, not only in that fighter jet scene, but then at the end as Lois and Superman are flying away. Really put a bow on things. So I gave it a pretty strong 7 out of 10.
And I gave it the exact same score. Once again, a 7 out of 10 from myself as well. I don't have too much else to add in that department. I think we covered it pretty well there. Definitely the standouts being the Superman theme and the that opening sequence as well definitely stood out to me as well. But a great outing from Mr. Krull, and that will bring us, Cal, to our final category for this week, that being voice acting. Now, I'm going to preface this. We've been talking for a while. There are about 1 million voice actors in this film, and some I will shout out. So basically, I'm going to read these very robotically. Usually, like, we say a name and then we talk about them and then we move on. Yep. I'm just going to read the credits here.
I think that's fair.
And then we'll kind of focus in on our 3 main actors that we'll really talk about, and then if we have any thoughts on the supporting cast, we can mention it very quickly. But so I will say we have Troy Evans as sort of the blowhard cable news Thought he was pretty funny. We have Andrew Kishino as the Hat. We had Fred Tatasciore as Perry White. We have Gray Griffin as the young Manchester Black in her flashback. We have, of course, DCAU legend Tara Strong as the young Vera in her flashback. We have Paul Eiding as Pa Kent. We have another familiar name, Melissa Disney as Menagerie. We have Jennifer Hale playing the kid who doesn't want to be Superman, which is a funny little bit. I don't think we mentioned, but yeah, that's a good bit. We do the other DCAU veteran in this piece. We do briefly hear one David Kaufman reprising his role for Superman the Animated Series as Jimmy Olsen. We have Katero Colbert. It would be Colbert if it's the guy who's on TV. I think it's Colbert most other places. As Coldcast. We have D. Bradley Baker as Atomic Skull. And then we have sort of our three main event players here. We have Paulie Perrette as Lois Lane. Folks would probably know her best as the goth girl on NCIS. We have Robin Atkin Downs, veteran voice actor, tons and tons of roles, including some other DCAU roles, minor and major, as Manchester Black. It's Robin Atkin Downs there. And then, of course, voicing himself, one of the two faves of this podcast, George Newbern, returning here as Superman. And so obviously this isn't the regular DCAU Superman. This isn't the Justice League Superman per se, but coming from everything we've talked about having, this sort of larger philosophical discussion of Superman and who he should be and how he should act. I think going back to an older Superman that people are familiar with helps, because you don't have to you don't have to kind of pretend like you need to, not that anyone needs introduction on who Superman is, really.
Right.
If you're older than 3 years old, you probably get the gist of it pretty quickly. But I think having a Superman, even though it's not necessarily literally the DCAU Superman, it feels like George Newbern's Superman, maybe. And so we feel like so we have this familiar face. We know sort of what his Superman is, who it represent, his Superman represents, and then we clash him with all of the elite, but mostly with Mr. Downs as Manchester Black there. So I think casting a former Superman voice in this role kind of, I think, helps you get up to speed very quickly on an experienced Superman who's kind of done it all and seen it all and is maybe feeling a little bit world weary, a little bit beaten down by it all. I think it helps to go back to an older voice. And obviously we're biased anyway, because he's one of our Supermen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even within his performance, it's certainly not the Justice League performance. It is a lighter, happier, I think version of Superman. Like it's a different way of, he does something with his performance that makes it sound a little bit different than the standard Justice League or Justice League Unlimited fare. I think which speaks to his ability to still play the same character, play a familiar role, but also make it unique and set apart from what that Superman is, who that Superman is. So yeah, I think unsurprisingly, I loved his performance. I loved the nuance of it being a lighter, happier, bubblier, more innocent, more, even as he's struggling through his idea of if he's lost his place in society, or if he's lost his worth, or if people don't value him or see are changing so much that they're not going to agree with his way of seeing things anymore. He's still vulnerable. He's still very kind. Like, all of that comes through in the way that he maybe didn't get as many opportunities to convey in his performance in Justice League or Justice League Unlimited, where he did have lighter moments, and he was obviously lighter than Batman, but so much of that Cadmus story arc, as we talked about, is is a little bit darker for him, that he had to be the serious leader of the Justice League for a lot of that. So some of those popular blue sky and single bound leaping building Superman is kind of lost in that. So I like that it's nuanced. I like that it's different, and I think it's a home run.
Yeah, totally agree there. Not surprisingly, but to your point, this isn't a carbon copy of the JLU Superman by any means. He does have a little bit almost naivete to him that that is there, and I think that really helps inform the story, as especially by the end, as we've said, when he's kind of unleashing or seeming to be unleashing on these folks. I think that really adds to it. And then and that like we said, we've got a giant cast here, but really I think the other two names to touch on, we have doing most of the talking for the Elite, as mentioned, is Robin Atkin Downes as Manchester Black. You settle into it for a while. I think I was in my head, this was John Constantine's Matt Ryan. In my head, it was his voice. So it took me that's my own Mandela effect. That's not the fault of Mr. Downes, who's obviously done a ton of voice acting work to his credit. But I think you really settle into it, and he's just got a good veneer of just real slick and slimy, and a good foil for perhaps a more earnest Superman that we see in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe I don't know if I know he's from London or was born in London, so I don't know if his true accent is as much of the Cockney British accent that he sort of takes on for the role, but it feels very natural. He hits the it's a good day in it, without a hint of irony a lot. Obviously, that's become more of a meme nowadays when mocking the British accent. But it sounds very natural. I thought he was fantastic. He's a perfect foil. He does sort of start off in a little bit lighter tone and then gets darker as the entire movie progresses, to the point where at the end, where he's sort of prepared to murder Superman, and relishing it at that. It's certainly a vast difference from the way that he started the film out. So unsurprisingly, that this guy has roles in other major films and other cartoons and other different mediums. So he's very talented. He comes across as a menacing adversary to the Man of Steel, and a natural foil at that. So I thought his performance was outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about George Newbern having to flip that switch in the final scene when he's going, when he's putting on the evil Superman act. And then on the other hand, you have Mr. Downes kind of having in the visuals, we see he has tears in his eyes, which again is kind of ripped right from the comic, where he's sort of pleading with Superman, being like, you're not supposed to do this. Like, you're not supposed to come down to my level. And he sort of begins to he's angry, he's upset, and then he's terrified, kind of all within a couple of minutes of screen time. So great job by Mr. Downes. And I like Miss Perrette as Lois Lane. Like, she doesn't get a ton to do, but she gets a little bit, as mentioned, sort of a side quest in this, where she's doing a little bit of the investigating herself. And her, like we said, her playing off of George Newbern and their, as we talked about, their very loving relationship. I think she works for a Lois Lane in this story as well. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving voice acting a very strong 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I just went 1 point higher. I actually went with a perfect 10 out of 10. I think the only
Nice.
The only voice that we really missed was a gentleman by the name of Bruce Timm, played one of the MI5 agents. So an unknown actor there, getting his due. Part of me wishes that they had cast Dana Delaney just for posterity as as Lois Lane, but I thought Miss Perret did a solid job. And at the end, it even felt very natural, as you mentioned a couple of times. I thought her and Mr. Newbern had quite the chemistry between them for their performances, and really made that relationship feel believable between the two characters. And you know, we don't always get to see, especially in the DCAU, we don't really get to see that loving relational aspect between not only Superman and Lois, but Clark and Lois also. So that was refreshing also, and it was the performances, I think, really made that feel like an authentic, loving relationship. So yeah, great job all the way around there by our voice cast.
Absolutely. So at that point, Cal, that will begin to move us to our final scores for this week. And tallying everything up, I appear to have arrived at a final score of 31 out of 40 for this week.
And despite our differences of scores, I guess we disagreed in two different categories, but in both of them we kind of flip-flopped on giving a point higher than the other. So I also ended up with the same exact score of 31 out of 40.
Well, how about that? As we often say, even when we don't agree in the individual category, somehow life finds a way, and we end up with the same final score here. Obviously, this is a movie, so we don't really talk about rewatchability in the traditional way we would with an individual episode. This has no sequels or prequels to its name as of now. I would just say, I think if you love Superman the animated series, if you love Justice League Unlimited, if you just love Superman, I think this is a good exploration of that character, and as we kind of touched on, kind of a good companion piece to the Cadmus JLU arc, as far as, you know, the Superman going through a dark night of the soul sort of thing, and sort of really examining what his role should and shouldn't be in some cases in a more modern world. So I definitely give this a thumbs up. If you're this would be one that I think I had only seen this once before, but I'd definitely be more inclined to go back to it now.
Yeah, I'd say it's a recommendation for me as well.
Well, that will begin to wrap us up this week. Cal, thank you everybody for listening. This was a little bit of a longer one, but like you said, this is kind of one of our big celebrations of Superman here on his 85th birthday year. And certainly we will be covering more Superman later in the year here, but wanted to give him a special spotlight on our Elseworlds event. So thank you everybody for listening, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or of course, as mentioned earlier, on the Pod Tower YouTube channel. We do appreciate that. A good free way to support us is to just subscribe on whatever platform you do happen to listen to us on, and if that platform allows you to leave us a review or give us 5 stars, gives us a thumbs up or whatever, we would appreciate you taking the time to do that. That does help bump up our show in the all important search algorithms. If you'd like to support the show more directly in a financial sense, there are a couple of links in the description of this episode, wherever you're listening to it, that can take you there. Either a direct little donate button where you can buy us a coffee, or of course you can head to our store at DCAUreview.com and always pick yourself up a hat or a shirt or something. We appreciate those that take the time to support us financially. We always appreciate them, and everybody who listens. You know, listening alone is a great way to support our show. So we thank everybody for listening. And Cal, as we look to turning the calendar page to a new month next week, I think it's time once again to look to the future.
The future, Liam?
That's right, all the way to the year that's 50 years from now, whenever now is. It's another Batman Beyond Flash, the Zeta Project month coming up on the horizon for the month of May. But thankfully, we'll be kicking it off with a Batman Beyond review next week, and I can't wait for that. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.